where you went to school, and then how you got to Atlanta.
Okay.
And then I'll lead you into the rest of the questions.
Okay. Ready?
You all look at
Do you
her.
want to put the water down?
Yeah,
Or?
you could put, you're not seeing it, but you can put it down, yeah.
Okay.
If you need a break, just if you want
Okay.
to start over, just
Okay.
let's
Slide for me. All right, cool.
and look at me.
Look at
Oh.
her. I always.
I put
Okay.
extra makeup on.
Ah, I did too. Oh.
Okay, so
Okay.
go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. I'm Eristine Ward Hunter. That's Eristine E-A-R. Do I have Candy? Can you
You
also?
just look at me.
Oh.
Yeah.
On the camera in here, you just having a
Focus,
conversation
focus.
with
Okay.
your friend Tracy.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, start over?
Yeah, just look
Okay.
at Tracy. That's
Okay.
your friend.
Oh, that's my friend. Okay. I'm Eristine Ward Hunter. My name is spelled E-A-R-I-S-T-E-A-N. Not Ernestine, but Eristine. Okay. I am a native Atlantean. I was born and bred here. I am a Grady baby and proud of it. I attended school here in Atlanta. Finished school 1960, June 1st, 1960. In fact, we just celebrated our 55th anniversary last week. I participated in the student movement prior and was very active with a lot of my friends and fellow students who were part of the AU Center. We marched on, we would congregate, we would all meet and march on Clark Atlanta's campus, Spelman, Morehouse, and the ITC students, as well as at Clark Atlanta. That Clark Atlanta was the focal point. And from Clark Atlanta, we would march up there to Chestnut, which is James P. Brawley now, and march down James P. Brawley to Hunter Street, which is Martin Luther King now, MLK. And we would pick up the students at Morris Brown from that point in ITC. And that was the point of no return. And we were taught to practice passive resistance. So by that time, at that point, you had to decide whether you were going to go on downtown or if you wanted to turn around and come back. And a lot of them did. A lot of them turned around because their families, they had to think about their parents. We all did. But we felt the need to do, the charge to do what we needed to do, so we went ahead. So we marched on Rich's downtown, which is Macy's now. We marched on Crystal, we marched Woolworths, HJ, I believe it's HJ Kresge, the launch counters at Woolworths. And then we would go on uptown to Davidson's, which was the Atlanta store for Macy's here. And there was also a cafeteria across the street, I believe, S&W cafeteria. We marched there too, we picketed them too. It was very interesting. Sometimes we would be marching, the Klans would be on one side of the street, and we would be on the other. I don't know where we got the nerve from to do this, but we went ahead on, and some of us were sped on. I was never faced with that, but thank God. But a lot of my friends were, but because of the training we had, we knew not to react, and we just forged ahead.
So we're going to take your interview and cut it up into little stories
Okay.
about each of the markers that will go up in the different places around Atlanta.
Okay.
So there will be one at SNCC headquarters.
Okay.
Anything you want to say about the significance of SNCC during the time of the movement?
SNCC was the baby of the movement, I guess you could say. SCLC was the daddy. NAACP was the daddy. So we were the babies, and most of the young people participated, joined SNCC. Some of us went on to work with SCLC, but we were still students, we were still associated with one another. So anytime anything was going on, there were any calls to go out to march or picket, we did. Even if we were working with SCLC and had, the call came out, because they were our friends, we wanted to participate, and we did. So we just felt the need, and I think part of that came from our experience of being members of the Atlanta Junior Voters League. We would go out and register people to vote. There was a man called Chief Akins who owned the Wallahaji, which is called the Job Corps, Atlanta Job Corps, I believe now. But Chief wanted us to have a place to not only meet, but a place to gather for fun too. So he provided the facility, the Wallahaji Ballroom, after all of our meetings and our going out and talking with people in the community. He would provide us with a weekly dance, which got to be a big deal for our group. And kids from all over Atlanta would come, because with the Atlanta student movement, it wasn't just one school. At that time, I believe we had 5 schools. That was Washington High, Howard High, Price High, Carver, and Howard High. So those were, I believe, the 5 schools, and students were selected from all of those schools. In addition to the Atlanta Junior Voters League, some of those same students were recruited for the Atlanta NAACP Junior League. So we just, I think that was our basis, our focal point for getting involved in community activities, in voter registration, and wanting a better life. I think somewhere down the line we were the chosen ones, if I may say. I think we were the chosen generation, because prior to us there was Bayard Rustin and others who had tried to desegregate facilities, I believe in the 40s, the early 40s. And in fact, I wasn't even born during that time. But the history is there, and I'm very, very honored and very glad to be a part of it.
So let's talk about the efforts to integrate public accommodations, hotels and restaurants, like Pickricks and Heart of Atlanta Motel, and the refusal of those owners to serve.
By that time, I was working with SCLC, and Lester Maddox was very vocal and very adamant that he was going to keep his Pickrick restaurant as he saw fit, segregated. And we went out and marched. We went out and joined the groups to march on the Pickrick, and we were faced with the axe handles. I remember at one point he was actually crying. He was just, he believed that he was just that adamant about not desegregating his restaurant. And he had a lot of blacks who worked for him, and ironically, those black people that worked for him loved him dearly, and he loved them. So it was an interesting phenomenon, if you can call it that. But they said he was good to them. But of course, we had some blacks in Alabama who said that George Wallace was good to them too. So I wasn't one to challenge that, but I still felt we had the right to picket his restaurant, as we did the others in Atlanta, and assert our rights to desegregate.
The Heart of Atlanta Motel?
Now, I didn't do the Heart of Atlanta. Some of my friends did. But I remember that, and I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember if Hosea Williams led that. I believe he did. But I didn't participate in that particular one. But Hosea was very formal, very, very strong-willed gentleman, was one of the henchmen, as they called him, for SCLC, and one of the front runners. He would go out and actually look at places that he felt, you know, needed to be desegregated and come back and bring it to the executive staff, and that was how they selected different places that we were going to integrate. But we were the babies. We were part of the secretarial staff. And Dr. King would have meetings with us, and staff meetings, and he would ask us if we thought we could go out and not be, and be nonviolent. And of course, some of us said yes, and some of us said no, especially when it came to spitting on us. That was a no-no. But through training and really learning about passive resistance, we all agreed to go out and do what we needed to do. And we were very happy to do it too. We were excited about doing it. It was the timing was right. It really was.
Okay. We talked a little bit about this mass demonstration that took part in Hurt Park and after the March on Washington for Jobs. Did you want to say anything specific about that?
I didn't participate in that part, but I knew a lot of people who were involved in that. By that time, you had a lot of black vendors who were asserting their rights too. And I did become involved with the Black Vendors Association. And it was very heartbreaking to see some of those people being mistreated during the demonstrations. But Hurt Park should never be forgotten. It was very focal. It was a focal point for the black vendors of Atlanta, where you saw a lot of them around the 5 Points area. All they were trying to do was make a honest living, and they had a right to assert their rights to do that. A lot of those same vendors were Vietnam veterans, and couldn't find jobs when they came back. Some of them were suffering from, we didn't know at that time, but Agent Orange and PTS, what is it, post-traumatic stress syndrome, I think it is. So they had a lot of issues that needed to have been addressed. And a lot of those vendors not only fought for their right to integrate Hurt Park as well as other facilities, they used that medium, that particular place to talk about the Vietnam War and what they had experienced and how it affected them. So, no, I was not a part, but I definitely supported their efforts to do that.
So let's talk about the protests like Rich's and Crystal's and Dobbs House, and you don't have to specify, but I really would like for you to tell the story with Rich's, This Christmas Give Freedom, and that whole campaign that you all executed.
We really went out to, Rich's was focal because that was one of the main department stores in Atlanta. My mother worked, rented, shop there. All of us shopped there. And one of the things that we decided to do, the Atlanta student movement decided to do, was to stop forging an economic boycott. And I can remember my mother being a part of that, and other people who rode the major bus lines in Atlanta refusing to take the buses downtown and refusing to shop at Rich's or Davidson's simply because our dollars counted too. And we wanted to get that point over. I can remember my mother and other ladies in the community not riding the Atlanta transit system. However, there were older men in the community who had retired. They would take their cars and take these ladies all the way to Buckhead, these maids, all the way to Buckhead. The movie The Butler makes me think about those times. It also reminds me that we never thought about what our parents thought about us picketing. We just did what we thought was right. But the butler brought it home about how our parents might have felt and how it might have affected them. I can remember my mother working at the Dinkler Plaza. When Dr. King received the Nobel Peace Prize, her daughter walked in with the rest of the others to integrate that, celebrate his honor him at the Nobel Peace Prize dinner that we had for him. So I'm getting very nervous. I don't know what's wrong with me. Excuse me.
No problem. And I, go ahead, take a sip, and while you take a sip,
Okay.
I thought that was so interesting that your mother was working at the athletic club,
Uh-huh.
and
The
you had
Dinkler.
march right in front, right?
Sure did. The backside of Macy's was Carnegie Way. And that was the front side of the Atlanta Athletic Downtown Club. So it was very interesting to see me picketing right in front of my mother's job. But she never got any repercussions from it, thank God. But, you know, that's just how bold we were. We didn't fear anything. I'm not going to say I don't fear things now. Sometimes I look back and say, Lord, have mercy. Did I do that? But we did. We really did.
And her coworker said,
You better get Cookie out there. Oh, Mr. Harrison sees her. He was the big boss there.
okay. The Atlanta Inquirer, what was the impact of the Inquirer on the Atlanta student movement?
The Atlanta Inquirer was the medium we used to get out our message. And I think some of the other newspapers were a little intimidated. So that was like the student paper. So anything that was going on in the civil rights movement, that paper would publish it. As I think back, I don't think the Atlanta World did a lot. I really don't. But that was the paper that helped us. And whenever anything was going on, we could always refer to that paper. So that was really, it was our paper. It was the movement, the student movement paper, because it would tell whatever was going on. I think they did put a copy of the Appeal for Human Rights in there. It's my understanding that I think Vanderveer was the governor then, and he was very adamant in saying that no students wrote the Appeal for Human Rights, as if to imply we weren't smart enough to do that. But yes, a very smart young lady did write the Appeals for Human Rights, along with Lonnie King and some others.
And let's talk about the impact of the movement lawyers on the Atlanta student movement.
The movement lawyers were very focal and very important to us because they had to be there for us to, for those of us who decided to go to jail. So they were very, very important to us. And I understand that the NAACP, I can't think of this fund they had that was designated to get most kids out of jail. And I understand they did it all over the nation. Because my husband was a freedom rider, and he was part of the group from CORE that was assisted through the legal defense fund, the legal defense fund.
And that was a perfect segue if you want to talk about the impact that the freedom riders had on, you know, advancing the civil rights movement.
Okay.
You know, and any students you may have known that joined the freedom riders.
Well, one student was my husband, Larry Hunter. He was with the Tennessee State 14, the Nashville 14. they decided to join Jim Farmer, who was head of CORE. And there was also another movement with the American Baptist College, where John Lewis went, and James Bevel, and Fisk University, where Diane Nash led the movement. But there were 14 students from Tennessee State who went to Jackson, Mississippi, and were incarcerated. And as a result, Tennessee State expelled them. Now that 14 took Tennessee State to they sued them, and they won their lawsuit. But some of the 14 of the students were expelled, and some didn't come back, and my husband was one of them. Some 45 years later, 40-ish, 45, 43 years later, Tennessee State, through the Board of Regents, agreed to award all 14 students of Tennessee State, Doctorate of Humanities degrees. And they are doctors now. And I say it very proudly, my husband is Dr. Larry F. Hunter. But they forged their movement was going on, and I think the Nashville movement started before Atlanta's did. But it was interesting how Nashville, Atlanta, and I believe North Carolina also had started a movement. So the timing was right, and we were right for the picking, and we were ready to go. So we knew no fear. We just did what we felt we needed to do.
Any specific stories with the Freedom Riders?
Yeah, the night Dr. King had them in his church, I believe it was Reverend Evan at his church at that time, they were all there. And that was the night the city of, I believe it was Birmingham? I believe it might have been Montgomery. And they were all in the church, and I think you've probably seen clips of it. But they were threatening to burn that church down at any cost until Bobby Kennedy, Dr. King got Bobby Kennedy to issue to get the National Guards to come in and take over. And also made the Alabama state troopers, I think, their state guards, and they nationalized them. So they had to honor what what Kennedy had set down for them. I understand a lot of people didn't like that, but if it had not been for his efforts and Dr. King's insistence of his help, that whole church would have been burned that night, and we would have had another bombing. You know, and it's just so sad to think about how cruel people were. We lost three young people through in Mississippi, Shaney, Schwerner, and Goodson, I think was the other young man's name, all because of hatred. And it's just astounding how bitter these people were. When I think about the little girl, I believe it was the Little Rock Nine that had to face those people. Fortunately, Atlanta avoided a lot of that because we had community leaders who saw the handwriting on the wall and also realized that we weren't going to step back. We weren't going to sit down. So we had leaders who were willing to come together, black and white. Ivan Allen, I think, led that group, and he became mayor as a result of it. A lot of whites were angry with him, but he did have the foresight to come together and come up with a viable plan to integrate Atlanta. And as a result of it, this is where we are today. And I thank God for Ivan Allen. He was hiring a lot of my friends in his campaign and paid $25 a week. That was a lot of money then. Sharon Strickland can tell you about that. she worked with them.
And I understand it was Ivan Allen who brought the businesses together to have that meeting, where the students went later to Warren Memorial to try to get everyone on board and on the same page to go ahead and agree to wait until, let's see. And I think Dr. King gave the speech. He was sick, he was not feeling well that night at Warren Memorial, but what are your memories of Warren Memorial?
Warren Memorial, Mount Moriah Baptist Church, West Hunter they were the focal points of the civil rights movement. They opened their doors, and Mount Moriah is my home church. They were situated right in the middle of the AU Center. So a lot of students, long before the movement started, would attend church in Mount Moriah, Warren Memorial, Ralph Abernathy's church, West Hunter, and Providence Baptist Church also. So the ministers were very, very focal, very important to the movement, and a lot of those same ministers had gone to Morehouse, had gone to ITC, so they had a bond. We all had a bond to work together, and they opened their doors to us and made us feel comfortable. War Memorial, right across from Mount Moriah, were two of the main churches in Atlanta that we always went to. And of course, we had to go to we had Ebenezer, and we had West Hunter. So we had the connection because Dr. King had gone to Morehouse. Now, I'm not sure where Reverend Abernathy went, because I think he was from Alabama, but he was an ordained minister, as was, I believe, Andy and Joseph Lowry, and of course, Dr. Vivian.
The Quadrangle, did you say you met sometimes at the Quadrangle with the students?
The Quadrangle was Clark Atlanta, Spelman College, Morehouse College, and at that time we called it the Kona, Yates and Milton's. So when we met there, that was the starting point for us to go downtown. And as I said before, once we marched from Clark Atlanta, we headed down Chestnut Street, which is James P. Brawley, to Hunter Street, which is now MLK Drive. And it was just the place to be. There was no need for ITC to Morris Brown to come over there because we were going right by them. So we would pick these kids up at the bridge. That's the famous bridge that's still there now. They would be waiting on us. And as I said earlier, that was the focal point for us to turn around if we didn't feel that we could be passively resistant, or we went ahead, we forged ahead. And we forged ahead, a lot of us did. And some of the kids that did turn around, they worked behind the scenes because some of their parents didn't want them involved, and that's understandable. So what a lot of them did, they did placards, put out papers, and you probably don't know anything about a mimeograph machine, but that was our source of printing then. And so a lot of those kids worked behind the scenes. So that's why you had the foot soldiers of Spelman and the other kids from Morehouse, the young men from Morehouse too. But we all came together collectively as a group to create the Atlanta student movement. And it was a wonderful time for us.
Last question, Rush Memorial.
Rush Memorial, okay.
What are your memories with regard to Reverend Boone and Rush Memorial and their assistance too?
Rush Memorial is very special to me. I went to elementary school at Rush Memorial, ironically, and then Reverend Boone became, I believe he was president of the Operation Breadbasket in Atlanta. And Reverend Boone was very Hosea, maybe in a lighter form, but Reverend Boone would he had a great following, and was a good minister here. He did a lot of good. He had an opportunity. He took opportunities to step ahead and come to meetings with these businesses and make them understand that there were needs in his community. So he really did fight for his community, as well as the movement period. But Reverend Boone will always be remembered, I think, as a very formidable figure in Atlanta, as well as Hosea Williams, as well as Dr. Vivian, Dr. King, and let's not leave out Daddy King. Now, he did march with us sometimes. I think he was in the Selma to Montgomery March, and I believe he was in Washington when we went to the March on Washington. But we had some very strong people behind us, some very good minds, some very strong minds behind us, too. So it was very easy for me and a lot of my friends to feel the need and fulfill it, to go out there and do what we felt we needed to do. And even today, we still feel a need. We are not through. The problem is still there. Voter registration is still a problem. Voting rights is still a problem. So these are things that it's time to pass the torch on, and it's time for our young people to step up. Okay, so we need all the young people we can get. I've recently started an organization along with a dear friend of mine, Lily Benitez, to reach out to unsung heroes. There are a lot of people in Atlanta who have never, ever had an opportunity to tell their story, and we need to hear their stories. We know about the Andy Youngs, we know about the Dr. Vivians, but we don't know about the unsung heroes and sheroes of Atlanta and other places. So we're working very adamantly to get their stories told, and they can reach us through you if you will allow us to. Could I take that opportunity to put you on the spot and say, if you want to cut that out?
I want you to say the name of your organization
Okay,
so they know
okay.
how, they can look you up.
Okay. We are the Atlanta Unsung Heroes. We are an advocacy group for people who have never had an opportunity to tell their stories. One story I'd like to tell you about was when we went to the Selma to Montgomery March. Dr. King had left, and I kept saying it's getting dark, and we need to leave. We were in a mixed group, and we couldn't get out of Selma. So, in fact, I insisted that if dark caught us, I wasn't going back to Atlanta that night, because my mama told me, don't let dark catch you. I believed her. Well, the word was out. They wanted to kill Dr. King after the march, so they did get him on a plane back to Atlanta, he and Reverend Abernathy. But Andy stayed back to see about us, and Randy Blackwell. And I told him, I said, well, I'm not going back to Atlanta tonight in a mixed group, okay? And I was so adamant about it that we stayed. He said, okay, y'all stay tonight. I said, well, where are we going to stay? So Dr. King said, we didn't want to do that either because of the threats. But we did agree to stay, and we were having dinner at American Legion, I think. Reverend B.J. Johnson came over the PA system and said that Mrs. Viola Lizio had been killed, and along with Leroy Moulton. Well, everybody got upset, and they kind of said, well, how did you know? I didn't know. It was just a feeling I had. And I just knew that if we went back through Lowndes County, something bad was going to happen. And I thank God for speaking up that night, because we could have been in that group too. when we arrived back in Atlanta the next morning at SLC, the next afternoon, by the way, we slept on the floor of the SLC office there, scared to go back to Dr. King's house. When we got back to Atlanta, Leroy Moulton was in Atlanta, and we were just elated to see him. And he told us that the Klan had stopped them, had forced them off the road, shot Mrs. Luizio, thought they had shot him, drove off, and they doubled back. They doubled back. And when they came back, they got out of the car, took their guns, the butt of their guns, and butted them. And he didn't dare make a sound. So those are some things that, I will always remember. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so.
Sorry.
So those are some of the things that we've had to endure. And I thank God I had the nerve, the gall, as they say, to speak up and say, I ain't going back to Atlanta tonight, in no mixed group. And it saved our lives. So these are the stories that need to be told. And I know I'm not the only one that has the story to tell. So I encourage everyone to please come join us. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. That was awesome. Oh, I knew you were going to be great. And I had to beg you.